So happy Wednesday. I've recorded this video like 4 times because every time I sit down to do it, I just become a corpse. So today I'm doing my May wrap-up. And it's weird because in the month of May, I felt like I was in a reading slump, but like looking at my pile, I read 5 to 7 books, depending on how you count. One of them is like a collection of 3, so you know. Let's just start. So the first book that I read is that collection of 3 books, which is Serenity Rose by Aaron Alexovich. So it's really hard for me to gather my thoughts about Serenity Rose because I just love it so much. Like, I found Serenity Rose when I was 13 and it was like a really big thing for me when I was 13. Like, it had a really huge impact on me. I'm really glad that I read it when I was 13, and I'll get into that in a hot second. But basically what it's about is, in this world there's 57 witches, and Serenity Rose is the youngest of those 57 witches. And the way that I don't know if this is a spoiler or not. I'm just gonna leave it at that. There's 57 witches, and this is like Serenity's coming of age story and coming out story. And I just remember being 13 and reading this, and there being a lot about Serenity that I related to. One of those things being that she has social anxiety, or just general anxiety and depression, and it deals with her kind of coming to terms with being a lesbian, which is like this was the first time I ever came across a lesbian in any form of media at all, I think. And that was like a really big deal for me. There's this one particular part where she's talking to her mentor and she can't even say the word lesbian, and her mentor just like finishes the sentence for her, and it just freaks her out. And it freaked me out because I grew up in a really homophobic, like, Catholic family. And so I was super conflicted about my favorite character in this comic that I love so much being a lesbian. But it was just me projecting because I was really conflicted about me being a lesbian. And something else that I also really appreciated this book talking about is like the goth subculture. Because I was a weird little goth kid when I was 13. And this kind of goes into something that I've noticed as I've gotten older, which is there's this thing in like the goth subculture where people just want to be mad. Like, they just want to be angry at things for fun. And this talks about why that's a shitty way to be. Because you can only be angry for fun for so long until you just become an asshole. I mean, you're already an asshole if you're just like being angry for fun, but like when you're 13, it's a little bit more excusable than if you're like an adult. And like, even though when I was 13 I just wanted to be shitty and angry and hate things, I'm still glad that like I read that when I was 13, because I'm sure I would have figured it out eventually, but having the seed planted I think was helpful. And also, since it's a comic, I have to show you like his art style. These are cool. There's these spreads that he did of like a concert, and they're so cool. Yeah, this is just, it's really good. And if you want to read it, the whole thing is available for free, like in webcomic form on his website. But if you want physical books, there's individual like paperbacks of the first 2 issues. I don't think he ever printed the 3rd one, which is a shame because I'd like to own it, even though I have like the compilation. Like, I have these 2 that I've had since 2009. So it would just be fun to own the 3rd one, but I digress. It's fun and it's good. Read Serenity Rose. The next book that I read is sort of in the, you know, the vein of comics, and it's Chibi Vampire by Yuna Kagesaki, and this is volume 1. So this is another reread for me, and I read this in like 2006 or 2007, whenever like the vampire thing was huge, because all my friends were super into Twilight, but I wasn't. I was just never into the vampire thing. But this is like a parody of it. It's about this girl Karen, and she's from a family of vampires, but she has this condition where she produces too much blood, and so she has to bite people to like inject them with the extra blood, or else it just explodes out of her nose in a huge nosebleed. And oh my god! And I don't know if I just don't like manga anymore. Like, I remember really loving this, and like I get why I would have loved this in 2006, but it's not something I would seek out now. But like, it's fun. It's like as tropey can be, but it's also like a parody, so it's supposed to be. The next book I read was Oscar Wilde In Memoriam by Andre Gide? This is the title page if you just want to Google it. So a little about just this book. The physical object that I'm holding. I found this in just a used bookstore for like $5. I started getting this impulsive need to purchase old books, and I've made a rule for myself that it has to be something that I'd at least be interested in potentially picking up and reading for me to buy it, because it's like I can't just buy every pretty old book that I see. And I'm really glad that I picked this one up because it's basically just a first-hand account of like all these different times where the author hung out with Oscar Wilde, and it's got a bunch of direct quotes and stuff that Wilde told him. And it's really cool to read because his opinion kind of flip-flops back and forth about him a lot, but ultimately I think he liked him. I think. So this particular publishing like edition of this is from 1949, but all of the essays and stuff that's written in here were written from like 1901 to 1910, I think. If you're into Oscar Wilde at all, I think you would enjoy reading this. I think you can get like paperback editions of this on Amazon. Like, it's out of print, but like people still print it. Next book that I read is What If by Randall Munroe, and I didn't realize that I knew who this author is. Not like personally, but I know XKCD. Like, I used to follow that webcomic, and it's so funny because what made me realize I know who this author is, it's just 100% because I recognize the way that he draws stick figures. Which is wild, but it's like so recognizable. But Randall Munroe used to work for NASA, and he's a physicist, but he's also a webcomic artist, and he has really good sense of humor. And so what this is he compiled a bunch of like crazy questions from his audience and then gave like real scientific answers to them. And it's just a really fun book, like full of thought experiments. What were some fun ones? What would happen if someone's DNA vanished? If every human somehow simply disappeared from the face of the earth, how long would it be before the last artificial light source would go out? That one's cool. How fast can you hit a speed bump while driving and live? So it's just like all of those kinds of questions, but then given real answers. And he's just really clever and funny because it's like his job to be clever and funny. And also, the dust jacket is a map of the world with the oceans drained. Because why not? I think like if you were into science, but not like enough that you would actually read an entire book all about science, I think this would be a good book for you because it's really funny and it's just fun. Even to just read it, not in order, but just flip through it and read whatever thought experiment sounds interesting to you that day, it's still like worth it. And the last book that I read is Warped Passages by Lisa Randall, and this book was so cool. So this is a book that kind of addresses a lot of like basics of physics, but the whole point is to sort of demystify the concept of extra dimensions. And I definitely feel like after having read this, I have a way better understanding of a lot of concepts that like I had heard about before, but never really got. And she mentions in the book that the reason that she wrote this is because a lot of books about science and physics that she read when she was a kid were mostly written by men and were really condescending, and she wanted to write a book that anyone could read and anyone could come away from learning something. And I really liked this. She had this like, at the beginning of every chapter there would be a sort of fictional narrative where she would place the concepts that she was going to be explaining in the chapter in the fiction so that there was a sort of application for it or a visual for it, just a way for you to picture it before she went into it. Like some of it was like an Alice in Wonderland kind of idea, where Wonderland was kind of like the world of brain worlds and physics. At the end of every chapter, she has like bullet points that just say in one sentence all the stuff that she introduced in that chapter. But there were parts of this book where I just couldn't put it down, which is maybe weird because it's just like science. But yeah, this was just a really cool read, and I'm really glad that I read it, and I'm really glad that I just happened upon it in a used bookstore. But yeah, that's all the books that I read in May. If you plan on reading any of these, or if you have read any of these, let me know what you thought about them or what you think about them, which ones you want to read. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you learned something, maybe, and I hope you have a good day.